All right, everyone, welcome back to ACE Your RES Exam Key Topic Deep Dive series. Forget floor plans for a second because today we're diving into something potentially tricky for your exam, Muslim inheritance law, and, how it interacts with real estate here in Singapore. Think of this as your essential guide, your cheat sheet, really, for this part of the RES syllabus.
That's right. We're going deep into Singapore's Administration of Muslim Law Act, or AMLA, much easier to say. And specifically, we're looking at Faraidh. That's the Islamic system for distributing assets after someone passes away. We'll unpack how this applies to property, which properties fall under these rules and which might follow civil law instead.
And why should you, our aspiring RES superstar, care about this? Well, imagine you're handling a property sale. Everything seems smooth, and then suddenly you find out Muslim inheritance law is involved. Understanding Faraidh could be the difference between a smooth deal and a, complicated situation. It's crucial knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. Faraidh, what is it? It's Islamic inheritance law, plain and simple. It dictates how a deceased Muslim's assets are distributed among their heirs. It's all based on the Quran and Hadith. The term itself, al-Faraidh, means fixed portions.
Fixed portions, so it's not really up for debate how things get split.
Not generally, no. The core idea is that specific fixed shares go to lawful heirs as defined by Sharia law. Here in Singapore, the legal basis for this is mainly Part 7 of AMLA. And there's another layer, different schools of Islamic law or madhabs. In Singapore, the default is the Shafi'i school, unless it's proven the person followed another one.
Shafi'i school, does that drastically change things?
It can influence the finer details of the share calculation, but for your RES exam, just knowing Shafi'i is the default here is probably enough detail. Think of it as the standard operating procedure, unless told otherwise.
Okay, so Faraidh sets the rules, AMLA enforces them, usually following the Shafi'i way. Which properties actually get dealt with under Faraidh?
Generally, we're talking about the intestate property, meaning property left without a valid will of Muslims who were domiciled here in Singapore and passed away after July 1st, 1968. That's the key date.
After mid-1968. Got it. And what if there is a will? Does Faraidh just step aside?
Not quite. Even if a Muslim leaves a will, it still has to respect certain Faraidh principles. It can't completely ignore the fixed shares, especially for certain heirs. We'll get into that more.
Okay, so wills aren't a total escape route. But I hear there are some major exceptions, especially with property. What about, say, joint tenancy? That seems like a big one.
You've hit the jackpot question there. This is absolutely key for real estate. Properties held under joint tenancy under the Land Titles Act are generally exempt from Faraidh. The principle of survivorship applies, meaning the property automatically passes to the surviving joint tenant or tenants.
Automatically. So Faraidh doesn't even get a look in.
Exactly. The right of survivorship takes precedence. This isn't just practice. It was confirmed by the Court of Appeal. There was a significant case, Shafiq bin Salim Talib v. Fatima bint Aboud, and MUIS, the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, issued a fatwa on this in 2019 supporting this position.
Wow, okay. So if you see joint tenancy on the title deed, that's a huge indicator for how the property passes upon death, regardless of Faraidh.
Precisely. For your RES exam and in practice, that's probably the most important exemption to remember concerning real estate. Always check the mode of holding.
Makes sense. Huge point. What other assets might sidestep the Faraidh distribution?
Well, CPF monies are another major one. If the deceased made a valid CPF nomination,
The money goes straight to the nominee.
straight to the nominee. It doesn't form part of the estate for Faraidh distribution. It's treated separately. Same logic generally applies to life insurance payouts, where a specific nominee has been named under the relevant legislation, like the Conveyancing and Law of Property Act. Those go directly to the nominee, too.
Okay, so joint tenancy properties, nominated CPF funds, nominated insurance payouts. These have their own path. They're outside the Faraidh calculation.
Correct. You need to identify these first before you even start thinking about distributing the rest of the estate according to Faraidh.
Right. So once those are set aside, what about the remaining estate? Are there things that get deducted before we calculate the Faraidh shares, like debts or expenses?
Yes, definitely. Before the Faraidh shares are calculated and distributed, several things need to be paid or accounted for from the estate. First, any valid gifts, or Hibah, that were made and fully completed by the deceased during their lifetime are generally excluded. They're already gone.
Completed during their lifetime. What about promises made just before death?
Things like Nuzriah, which are essentially vows or gifts intended to take effect close to death, those are usually viewed differently and might not be exempt.
Yeah.
Generally, trying to give things away right at the end to avoid inheritance rules doesn't work easily.
Okay, so genuine lifetime gifts are out. What else?
For Malay specifically, there's harta sepingkarian. This is property acquired jointly during the marriage. The court can decide how this matrimonial asset should be divided based on Malay custom first. Only the deceased's remaining portion of that asset then becomes subject to Faraidh.
Interesting. So a bit of custom comes into play there for matrimonial assets. Keep going. What else gets deducted?
Any vows, nasr or nazar, made to Allah need to be fulfilled. Then, of course, funeral expenses and any other costs related to the death and burial. After that, debts. First, debts to Allah like any unpaid zakat owed to MUIs. And finally, debts owed to other people. All these must be settled from the estate.
Phew. Okay. So, funeral costs, vows, debts to God, debts to people, all paid up. Now, what's left is the net estate for Faraidh, but what if the person left a will, a wasiat? How does that fit in?
Right. The will, or wasiat, a Muslim in Singapore can make a will, but there are significant limitations compared to civil law wills. The key rule is you can only will away up to 1/3, just 13 of your net estate. That's the estate after all those deductions we just listed.
Only 1/3. And who can they give that 1/3 to?
Generally, that 1/3 portion can be willed to people who are not already Faraidh beneficiaries. Think friends, non-Muslim relatives, adopted children who are considered Faraidh heirs, or charities. You generally cannot use the will to give more to an existing Faraidh heir, like giving your spouse or son a bigger share than Faraidh prescribes,
Unless. There's always an unless.
unless all the other Faraidh beneficiaries who stand to get less because of it agree. And importantly, they have to give this consent after the person has passed away. Getting consent beforehand doesn't count.
Wow, okay. So the will is mainly for that 1/3, often to benefit non-heirs, and you can't easily use it to tweak the Faraidh shares among the main family heirs without later agreement. That sounds potentially tricky?
It can be. It requires consensus.
Yeah.
And trying to use things like testamentary Nuzriah, those deathbed gift promises to get around these will restrictions, is generally not valid under Singapore law.
Got it. And just technically, for a will to be valid in Singapore, does it need anything specific?
Yes, the formalities under the Wills Act apply. It needs to be in writing, signed by the person making the will, the testator, and witnessed by at least 2 other people who are present at the same time.
Standard will formalities, then. Okay, we know what's exempt, what gets deducted, and how wills work. Sort of. Who are the actual beneficiaries under Faraidh? Who gets these fixed shares?
Right, the beneficiaries. It's quite a defined list based on relationship to the deceased. For males, you've got sons, the father, grandfather, husband, various types of brothers, uncles, nephews, cousins. It's quite extensive. For females, there are daughters, the mother, grandmothers, maternal and paternal, the wife, sisters, granddaughters through sons, and again, different types of sisters.
A whole family tree involved, potentially. And isn't there a general principle about male versus female shares?
Yes, a commonly cited principle from the Quran is that generally a male heir at the same level of relationship receives double the share of a female heir at that same level. For example, a son typically inherits twice as much as a daughter.
Okay. And you mentioned fixed shares earlier.
Exactly. There are primary heirs called ashabu furud, whose shares are explicitly fixed in the Quran, like the husband, wife, parents, daughters. They get their prescribed fraction first. Then, whatever is left over goes to the asaba, who are typically male relatives in order of priority, like sons, then the father, etc. They're the residuary heirs. If there's a residue but no asaba, or if there are no heirs at all, the estate might go somewhere else. Which leads us to Baitulmal. But first, the process.
Right, the process. Someone passes away, Faraidh applies to their property. What are the steps to actually get it distributed?
Step 1 is usually to go to the Syariah Court. You need to obtain an inheritance certificate. This document officially identifies the legal beneficiaries according to Faraidh and specifies their respective shares. Important note, the Syariah Court issues this based on the information provided about the family structure. It doesn't typically conduct hearings or investigate deeply, and it doesn't consider any will at this stage.
So the inheritance certificate is the Faraidh distribution map based on the facts given. What's next for actually transferring assets like property?
Next, you need legal authority to administer the estate. This comes from the family justice courts, not the Syariah Court. You apply for either a grant of probate, if there's a valid will, or a grant of letters of administration, if there's no will, i.e. intestacy. This grant appoints a personal representative, an executor for a will, an administrator for intestacy.
And this executor or administrator is the one who actually does the distributing.
Yes, they have the legal power and responsibility. If there's no will, the administrator distributes the net estate according to the shares shown in the Syariah Court's inheritance certificate. If there is a will, the executor first deals with the valid bequests in the will, up to the one-third limit, usually to non-Faraidh heirs. Then the remaining two-thirds, or more if the one-third wasn't fully used, is distributed according to Faraidh principles, often guided by the inheritance certificate for identifying those heirs and shares.
Okay, it's a two-court process in a way. Syariah Court for the Faraidh shares, family justice courts for the authority to distribute based on those shares and any valid will. Makes sense. So, thinking about planning ahead, what tools can Muslims in Singapore use for their estate, especially involving property?
There are several useful tools. We've discussed the Wasiat will for that one-third portion. Hibah, gift, made during one's lifetime is very effective for transferring assets outside Faraidh as long as it's properly completed. CPF nomination is crucial for CPF savings. Holding property under joint tenancy is a major planning tool for real estate, ensuring it goes to the survivor. There's also a deed of family arrangement. After the death, if all the beneficiaries are adults and agree, they can mutually decide to rearrange the inherited share among themselves. Needs to be done within 2 years, usually.
So the family can agree to redistribute things afterwards?
Yes, if everyone consents freely. Nuzriah vows can be complex. Testamentary ones are generally tricky. And waqaf, which is an Islamic charitable endowment, is another option. Assets put into waqaf are removed from the estate before distribution.
Lots of options there.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Baitulmal earlier. What is that exactly? The safety net?
Yeah, you can think of it like that. Baitulmal is administered by MUIS. It's a public treasury or fund for the benefit of the Muslim community.
Right.
The estate of a deceased Muslim might go to Baitulmal in a few scenarios. If there are absolutely no Faraidh beneficiaries found, or if there's a remaining portion after all Faraidh shares have been distributed and there are no asaba, residuary heirs, to claim it. Basically, it ensures the assets still serve the community if there are no individual heirs.
Okay, the ultimate backstop. So bringing this all back to our RES exam takers, what are the absolute key things they need to remember when facing a situation involving Muslim inheritance and property?
Okay, rapid-fire takeaways for the exam. 1. Joint tenancy in property generally overrides Faraidh due to the right of survivorship. Check the title. 2. Nominated CPF money and nominated insurance payouts are separate. They don't go into the Faraidh pot. 3. When dealing with a deceased Muslim's estate, you'll likely need to see the inheritance certificate from the Syariah Court to know the Faraidh heirs and shares. 4. Legal transfer of property requires a grant of probate or letters of administration from the family justice courts. 5. Remember, the limits on a Muslim will only up to one-third of the net estate, generally to non-Faraidh heirs, and you can't easily override Faraidh shares for main heirs without subsequent consent from all affected parties.
Excellent summary. It sounds complex, but knowing those key principles, especially the joint tenancy rules, seems vital for any real estate agent in Singapore.
Absolutely. Understanding where Faraidh applies and where civil law like the rules of joint tenancy or nominations takes precedence is critical. It helps you guide clients correctly and anticipate potential issues.
So future RES champs, while Faraidh itself has many intricate details based on family structures, focus on these core interactions with property law for your exam. Know about joint tenancy, CPF, wills, and the basic process involving the two courts.
Exactly. Grasp those fundamentals and you'll be much better prepared. Remember, Faraidh ensures assets are distributed according to specific religious principles, but Singapore law also provides mechanisms like joint tenancy and nominations that operate alongside it.
We really hope this ACE Your RES exam deep dive has helped clarify Muslim inheritance law for you. It's a significant topic, and understanding it adds real value to your professional toolkit. We wish you all the very best of luck in your upcoming RES exam. Go out there and ace it.